The elder cursed the sovereign in his heart. Why would he offer 500 million to a small country like Iran? It was because of his meddling that the faction now had to fork over 200 million. While the elder and the imperial advisor were negotiating, Aston observed the faction's operations. The internal members stayed on the mountain and trained to improve their cultivation day and night. The external members were far and few in between. Their talents didn't lie in cultivation. They handled most of the business matters at their company's headquarters. Their roles were easy to distinguish. The external members conversed with clients on a daily basis. They wore suits and leather shoes. The external members sitting next to the elders were most likely the upper management of the faction's businesses. Exposing their corruption would be a heavy blow to their source of their funds. Forcing Tempest Citadel into bankruptcy was safer and more efficient than conquering them with weapons. When the negotiations were over, the imperial advisor triumphantly led his team down the mountain. The elder was fuming. There was no one to vent his anger on except the external members around him. The royal family is useless. They don't know anything about governing a country. Their solution to every predicament is to ask for money. We've paid insanely high taxes and management fees over the years and provided personal bodyguard services for them. They haven't shown an ounce of gratitude. 200 million was not a small sum. They would have to gather the funds from subsidiary companies, and even then, he didn't know if they would have enough. The task fell on the vice president. As the elder's student, it was his duty to solve his teacher's problems. The elder instructed the external members to keep this incident to themselves while they worked out a solution. Thorin would be furious if he found out about their lack of resources. It would affect the internal members' cultivation. The storm at sea isn't as simple as it seems. We need to investigate to prevent a repeat of this incident. I'll hire the fishermen at the port at a high price and ask them to check out the situation at sea, his student suggested. The elder approved, and his student headed out with the executives. They didn't notice Aston nearby. He'd overheard their entire conversation. He proceeded to follow the external members to the royal city and investigated their residence and workplace. Stephen was on the balcony of his hotel room, leisurely savoring a cup of coffee with a scenic view of the royal city. It was quiet and peaceful. The people didn't seem to be affected by the ocean disaster. A cold breeze swept past, and Aston appeared beside him in a scatter of light. The imperial advisor forced Tempest Citadel to compensate 200 million. The total losses are close to 20 billion. 200 million is like a drop in the bucket. What is that supposed to resolve? The royal family's demanding compensation to exert their influence, Aston explained. Tempest Citadel can't refuse, because they're business partners. Both parties rely on each other to do business in the country. Stephen nodded in understanding. The situation in every country was similar. Even in the U.S., the wealthy families often conspired with government officials. Aston continued to report his findings. The president's cultivation isn't that high, but he had a knack for business. He's about to hire civilians to investigate the ocean. They suspect there's another reason behind the shipwreck. Let them do what they want. The whale could reach the depths of the ocean. Even the most advanced submarines and underwater detectors have their limits. They won't find anything. Stephen dialed Kim's number and asked her to bring investors and a large amount of capital to Garan. This was their opportunity to expand the United States' businesses. The hotel room had a full view of the city. Aston pointed out a villa 5 miles away. This was the vice president's residence. Stephen followed his line of sight and noticed a small group sneaking around the premises. There was nothing suspicious about their attire or mannerisms, but their shifty eyes and constant surveillance of their surroundings gave them away. Who are they? West didn't recognize them. They weren't there when he surveyed the residence. We're not the only ones targeting Tempest Citadel's businesses. They could be employees trying to take advantage of the crisis to drive the upper management out of the company and take over their positions. Well, whoever they are, we'll have to adjust our plan if they succeed. Let's go check it out. Stephen, Wes, and Aston changed into casual clothes and headed to the villa. The true identities of the suspicious group were the Asuras. The Asura King used his energy to create an illusion and disguise their outer appearance. Their goal was simple. They wanted to take over Tempest Citadel's territory and make the mountain their home. As for the faction, they'd be valuable allies in their quest to conquer the human realm. It was a shame that the artificial cultivator had refused to cooperate with them, but he'd abandoned Tempest Citadel, so there was no one around to stop their invasion. Tardador observed the group of external members dressed in suits and leather shoes. It didn't take them long to find them. The vice president is a weakling with barely any training, and the people around him aren't much better. Turning them into my subordinates will be easy. The Asura King's voice sounded from the sapphire necklace. You've messed up more than once. Don't let it happen again. When the sun sets, turn them into your puppets. Aston pulled up to the street across the villa in a black car. Stephen had a clear view of the executives through the glass walls on the second floor. They were walking around the villa like it was their new office. I thought Tempest Citadel was wealthy. Are they lacking funds to the point where they can't even afford an office building? Is that why they're using their house as an office? It's likely that their suppliers and business partners are staking out in front of the company to collect debts, Aston said. The market's operations have to keep running, and compensation from the insurance company is far away. The executives are hiding at home while they find a solution. Aston's guess was on the mark. Tempest Citadel's upper management was pressured by debt from the ocean disaster. They were talented in the business field, but without capital, there was nothing they could do. The vice president was the most stressed out of everyone there. $200 million has been added to our debt. It's in installments, but we still have to make monthly payments. Where are we supposed to get the money? Your teacher has already agreed to the Imperial Advisor's demands. It's too late to go back on his word. I know that, the vice president snapped. Starting today, reduce the employees' salary by 50% and delay payment for recruitment fees, office supplies, and other expenses as long as you can. The executives shared a look. They were reluctant to dig a deeper hole for themselves. The vice president noticed their hesitation, but he didn't have the authority to give orders. If you don't want to, then go back to the faction and ask the leader for help. The executives quickly expressed their agreement. We shouldn't bother him over minor inconveniences. We should have some emergency funds. Let's add them up before deciding anything. Their discussion continued until sunset. They were oblivious to the watchful gazes from around the corner. Tardador had assessed the cultivation of everyone in the villa. The executives were grand masters. They were powerhouses compared to the civilians in the city, but in the eyes of the Asura, they wouldn't be able to withstand a single blow. Stay outside and keep watch, Tardador instructed his team. Don't engage in battle no matter what. I'll go in alone. The ice dragon landed on the roof of the building across the villa. Stephen, West, and Aston observed the suspicious group of individuals. They were peering into the living room and watching the executives. What are they doing? Are they planning to take the executives hostage? Stephen asked, confused. It doesn't look like they're going to kill them, West said. Since the executives weren't in danger, they stayed on the roof to observe a bit longer before making a move. The executives had been working hard all afternoon. They asked the staff to prepare a meal. The staff walked into the kitchen, but there was no sound of pots and pans. When the executives went to the kitchen to check on them, they saw an unfamiliar man wiping blood from his mouth. Tardador had bitten the staff's necks and injected the unique poison contained in an Asura's body inside them. It spread through the nervous system and turned them into puppets. Their eyes glazed over and their pupils dilated. Under Tardador's orders, the staff pounced on the executives and held them down as he bit their necks. The villa fell deathly silent within minutes. Tardador took a seat on the couch and made himself a cup of coffee. He was becoming more fond of the human realm. Stephen was beginning to get impatient. The external members had mingled with the suspicious group and were standing around doing nothing. It was time to check on the situation himself. Stephen, Wes, and Aston concealed their auras and snuck into the villa through the vent. At the entrance to the living room, Stephen threw a dagger at the man sitting on the couch with his back facing the door to test him. When the dagger was inches away from the man's back, one of the executives from Tempest Citadel caught it between two fingers. That aroused Stephen's suspicion. The external members didn't train as much as the internal members. Blocking an attack was different from casually stopping it. The latter required skill and technique. Stephen's location had been exposed, so it was pointless to continue hiding. He stepped into the living room with Wes and Aston. The executives of Tempest Citadel didn't have a reaction to strangers barging into the villa and ambushing them. They stared straight ahead with blank expressions. You're the famous Mr. Stephen Adams, Tardador said mockingly. Everyone in this world knows who you are. You always show up wherever I go. Should I call this fate? Who are you? Stephen demanded. That's not important. You shouldn't have come here. Tardador glanced at the executives and they leaped into action. They locked the doors and windows, closed the curtains, and turned off the lights. The luxurious villa turned into an ominous battlefield. Tartador was determined to get rid of Stephen once and for all. Wes and Aston unsheathed their blades and made their first move. Tartador blocked the weapons with one swing of his fist. There wasn't a single scratch on his skin, but Wes and Aston were knocked back by his physical strength. Stephen focused his attention on the executives from Tempest Citadel. He couldn't understand how they were being controlled. Wes and Aston condensed the phantoms of 2 white dragons. They flew towards Tartador. When they brushed against the walls and furniture, they scattered like dust and were blown away with the wind. The high-frequency oscillation inside them ground everything around them into a powder on contact. Tartador sensed the danger. He avoided the dragons and took a few steps back. "You two aren't as simple as you look. Why aren't you attacking with your friend? It'll make the battle end faster." "You're not qualified to make Mr. Adams step in," Aston said. "We're your opponents," Wes added. Tartador held a grudge against Stephen, not his companions. His figure blurred as he rushed past them. Stephen was drowned in Tartador's afterimages. They both threw out their fists, and a violent shockwave swept the room. The remaining furniture shattered into pieces and scattered over the floor. Stephen didn't falter from the impact. He stood in place. His feet were firmly rooted to the ground. Tartador was impressed. "Your cultivation's higher than most humans. You're a young and promising cultivator, but I can't let you live." The Asura King's voice rang out in his mind. "Tartador, if you gain control of the Sovereign, the entire country will be under your command. Tempest Citadel pales in comparison." Tartador was arrogant, but he was aware of his limits. Sinking his teeth into Stephen's neck would only leave behind a minor, superficial wound. "I can't control him. His mental energy is too high." "Just distract him. I'll handle the rest." Tartador unleashed waves of energy, targeting Stephen's head with every strike to obstruct his vision. When Wes and Aston attacked him with their blades, he sidestepped and charged at Stephen. The sapphire necklace glowed, and a ripple in space spread through the air. The iridescent dragon appeared and landed on top of Stephen's head. It opened its mouth and absorbed the spiritual energy into its stomach. The iridescent dragon and the Asura King were the only ones who understood how much danger Stephen had been in. Stephen, who was none the wiser, began to scold the dragon. In his eyes, it was as harmless as a stuffed animal. "Can you warn me before you show up out of nowhere? We're in the middle of a battle. One attack will flatten you." The iridescent dragon snorted. "I'm not that weak. Watch this." It flapped its wings, and the air vibrated. Tartador was only a few feet away from Stephen, and he bore the brunt of the sound wave. He felt like his head had been thrown into a washing machine. He was lightheaded and disoriented. The executives stopped moving, and a blank expression returned to their faces. Without Tartador, they were puppets incapable of free will. The Asura King's voice sounded in Tartador's mind. "It's time to leave. We'll have another opportunity to kill him. His dragon is an unusual species. My techniques don't work against it." Stephen's dragon had the ability to swallow spiritual energy. If the Asura King couldn't land his techniques, they were as good as useless. The crowd ran out the door, leaving Stephen, Wes, and Aston alone in the villa, baffled by the turn of events. "Someone is controlling Tempest Citadel's executives," Aston said. "I don't think the elders or the leader are aware. Should we tell them?" Stephen nodded. "We need to warn them. Nothing good will come out of having their faction being controlled by outsiders. Inform the military and have them deliver the news. After that, monitor their movements." After Wes and Aston left, Stephen searched the villa. The fight had damaged the interior of the building, and most of the documents had been torn to shreds. Nothing of value was left behind. When Stephen left the villa, the iridescent dragon gave him a warning. "You need to be more careful. Your mental energy isn't that high. You almost became their puppet." "Who were they?" "I sensed the aura of an Asura coming from them. The man controlling the executives was probably one of the chiefs." Stephen replayed the fight in his head. The man seemed to hold some kind of grudge against him, but then again, many people did. However, the chiefs were one of the more recent enemies he'd made. It made sense if the man was one of the chiefs. Moreover, if the Asuras gained control of Tempest Citadel's executives, they'd have access to endless economic support. The only thing he didn't understand was how the Asuras had crossed over to the human realm. Didn't Tempest Citadel close the rift? How did they come to our realm? The most reasonable explanation I can think of is that they found a special method after they lost the war, the iridescent dragon replied. If they had this method to begin with, they wouldn't have gone through the trouble of searching for the exorcists. Stephen was a little concerned about Wes and Aston. The Azoras were targeting Tempest Citadel. He hoped he wouldn't get caught in any direct conflict. While Stephen was worrying, Kim arrived in Garan in a private jet. His mood brightened when he went to the airport to pick her up. 100 miles away from the royal city was Garan's coastal port. Stephen stopped the car and looked out the window in confusion. Up ahead was a simple office building illuminated by the moonlight. It looked like it had been renovated not too long ago. Did you predict your future business endeavors in Garan and ask your assistants to purchase this building in advance? Kim laughed. The 3 bosses from the 9 States Financial Group gave it to me to get on my good side. I had no choice but to accept it. She got out of the car and walked around the garden. She was impressed with the renovations. Zorvis, Juno, and Mike were experienced business owners. They somehow always knew that their business partners and clients wanted. The 9 States Financial Group had spread their influence across the world. It wasn't surprising that they had property in Garan. After Kim told them about the business opportunity here, they hopped on a plane right after they ended the call. They'll arrive tomorrow. They want to take this chance to develop their business. They have money and power, and they treat us with respect. They're valuable business partners. Stephen agreed. Kim and the 3 bosses worked well together. It was a good idea to introduce them to each other. They went for a late-night stroll on the beach and came across a commotion by the pier. A group of fishermen were surrounding the customs staff. The storm is over. It's not dangerous anymore. How long are you going to seal the coastal waters? We need to go out to sea to provide for our families. If we're not allowed to set sail, then why do we have to pay management fees? If you don't give us a satisfactory explanation, no one will be leaving this place today. The government had labeled the coastal waters a restricted area after the shipwreck last night. The investigation was still underway, but without access to the ocean, the fishermen were out of a job. In Garan, it was a serious crime to disobey the government. The customs staff took out their batons. The government has made it clear that until the investigation is over, no one is allowed to set sail. Is fishing the only thing you know how to do? What about construction or transportation? There's a lot of work available to support your families. The fishermen were beaten mercilessly with the batons. They were forced out of the pier. Kim was livid. The customs staff didn't even try to understand the concerns of the people. They resorted to violence and verbal abuse. Stephen held her hand in case she stormed up to the customs staff and gave them a piece of her mind. Every country has their own laws. It's not our place to criticize them. As Stephen was watching the customs staff, he caught a glimpse of the executives from Tempest Citadel. They'd just left their villa with the Azoras. Why were they here? His sharp gaze swept the crowd. There was no sign of the Azoras, but they could be watching from afar. Kim would be in danger if the Azoras found out she was his wife. Let's go somewhere else, Stephen said casually. Don't worry about the fishermen. On behalf of the U.S., I've provided financial assistance to Garan's royal family. They'll handle the aftermath of the ocean disaster soon enough. After some persuasion, Kim's attention shifted elsewhere. The whale's voice echoed in Stephen's mind. The government is sending divers into the sea to investigate the disaster. Should I do something about them? Let them be. They won't find anything. Stay out of sight for now. With a few words from Stephen, Carson would reopen the port. When the 3 bosses of the 9 States Financial Group arrived, they would set up an extension of their shipping company at the port. 20 large-scale transport ships and 5 luxury cruise ships would break Tempest Citadel's monopoly. For some reason, many hostile forces had appeared in Garan. Stephen was concerned that his presence in the country would encourage businesses with malicious intentions to make a mess of the port. It would be better to let the 9 States Financial Group take the lead. If they implemented substantial management fees and minimal dividends, hostile businesses would have to think twice before establishing their companies here. When the city guards informed the elders in charge of Tempest Citadel's businesses about the executives, he rushed to the company's headquarters at midnight. The external members waited for him in the vice president's office. It was rare for an elder to check on company affairs in person. Is there an issue with our funds or the accounts? No, the funds were mostly used up because of the shipwreck. The elder frowned. Gabriel was nowhere to be found, and they'd even lost their executives. When would the crisis end? The external members didn't have an answer either. They contacted the government and sealed every route out of the country. News of the elders' presence at the company spread quickly. Less than half an hour later, the distributors and suppliers had the building surrounded. The elder glanced out the window and saw the crowd downstairs. Are they here to discuss a potential collaboration? Unfortunately, no. We couldn't compensate all of our business partners for the losses during the storm. They're here to collect debt. They're ordinary people, not martial artists. Can't you calm them down using force? The elder was responsible for the faction's businesses, but he was an amateur when it came to handling internal affairs. The executives and the external members did most of the work. The external members shook their heads. Our competitors are watching our company closely. One mistake and they'll report us. It's impossible to defend against public opinion. Then what are you going to do? Let these creditors restrict our freedom? The elder demanded. The vice president and the other executives planned to transfer their available funds to pay off some of the debt to repair our relationship with our business partners, but they disappeared in the evening. Without a leader, no one dared to make a decision on their own. The external members fixed their hopeful gazes on the elder. Out of everyone in the office, he had the highest authority. Time is of the essence, and you were waiting for me to make a decision? I don't know why I bothered to make you employees of this company. Bring me the documents and contracts. I'll sign them. In the end, the elder paid $30 million in compensation. It was hardly enough to cover the losses, but their business partners' confidence in them was renewed. More external members rushed into the office. The government's investigation of the coastal waters had hit a dead end, but they discovered that there were fewer fish in the sea. They speculated that a marine beast had scared them away. It could be the culprit behind the shipwreck. The elder waved his hand dismissively. If there's no sign of the beast now, it's long gone. Keep your eyes peeled for Gabriel and the Azores. Send some people to the Imperial Court to monitor the surveillance cameras. Report back to the faction immediately if any suspicious individuals show up in the footage. He doubted any leads would turn up, but it was better than nothing. Will you be staying in the city for the time being? Would you like us to reserve a hotel for you? The elder turned down their offer. He didn't care where he slept. All he needed was a bed in the office. He didn't need to personally handle company affairs. The purpose of his presence was to sign documents. The elder dismissed the external members and cleared out the office. He placed a small compass on the desk and took out a handful of yellow talismans with strange symbols from his pocket. They were imitations of the sacred manual. They had a variety of functions similar to the talisman from the Tribulation sect. It was unusual for the executives to have vanished without a word. There were students of an elder. If they didn't come back, the elders' lives would be much more difficult. A weak flame illuminated the talisman, and a reflection of a dilapidated village appeared on the surface of the paper. The tiles on the walls were cracked, and the weeds were overgrown. The executives weren't the only ones in the reflection. The other missing external members were also there. The elders couldn't figure out why they were lingering in the middle of nowhere. They weren't tied up. They could just run away. The details weren't specific enough to determine their location. He noticed a blurry figure in the corner of the reflection. The talisman had never failed before. Whoever this mysterious man was had taken precautions to prevent outsiders from tracking him down. He was wearing some sort of necklace. It emitted fluctuations of mental energy that interfered with the talisman's vision. Tardador had led his team and his puppets 20 miles north of the port and found a fishing village to take a break. The executives were more useless than he'd thought. They weren't enough to take over Tempest Citadel's businesses. The Azores came over to give him suggestions. The conflict in the city is becoming worse, and the government doesn't have the necessary funds to resolve the problem. If we make a scene, it'll force Tempest Citadel to leave the mountain to maintain order. It'll be easier to get to them if they're not on their territory. Tardador's eyes lit up. Their plan gave him flashes of inspiration. If they forced Tempest Citadel to split up, their chances of turning them into puppets would increase. The mental energy of most of the ordinary members was low enough for him to control them. After that, all they would have to do was eliminate the elders and the leader to take over the entire faction. That's brilliant. When did you all get so bright? It's thanks to your guidance, of course. The Azores' flattery stroked Tardador's ego, but he didn't let it show. After all, the sapphire necklace was listening. He controlled his puppets and made them head back to the coastal port. Their cultivation was nothing to brag about, but they had a crushing advantage against normal civilians. If the fishermen were killed, the public's anger would be directed towards Tempest Citadel. They'd be forced to come to the city to handle the issue. In the morning, Kim went to the Imperial Court with Stephen to meet Carson. This was basic etiquette in Garan. Carson had been stressed ever since the ocean disaster. He forced a smile when Stephen's wife came to visit. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Miss Kim. I've heard that you and Mr. Adams are deeply in love. You're both geniuses when it comes to business. I believe you're not just here for a vacation. You have something important to discuss with me." "That's correct," Kim said. "Garan suffered significant losses from the ocean disaster. You'll need a considerable amount of investment to reconstruct the industry. I came here with potential investors hoping to develop their business at the port. I hope you don't mind." How could Carson refuse? Someone was delivering money to his doorstep. Tempest Citadel's businesses were severely affected by the disaster. After their recent losses, there was no telling when they would regain their former glory. "You have my full support, Miss Kim." Carson agreed without hesitation when Kim requested registering a new shipping company and reopening the sea. "The U.S. and Garan are neighbors," Stephen said with a smile. "Most of the resources here can be transported up north. I plan to purchase several batches of ores, crystals, and special herbs. I'll pay the industry standard, of course." Carson wasn't expecting Stephen's request. The resources he wanted were usually purchased by Tempest Citadel. There were raw materials related to cultivation. "Is there a problem?" Stephen asked. "Unfortunately, the government has signed an exclusive contract with Tempest Citadel. They have management rights over their resources. I hope you can understand." Stephen was aware that Tempest Citadel's internal members relied on herbs to refine cultivation pills and used ores and crystals to forge weapons. Without these resources, the faction would weaken. "In Garan, how much value does a piece of paper really hold? The king is the law. My wife's investors have made extensive preparations to develop their businesses here. Once the contract is signed, they'll arrange for transport ships and cruise ships at the port. Garan's national treasury will be filled to the brim with foreign reserves. If you have sufficient finances, what problems can't be solved? However, I understand if you'd like to preserve your contract with Tempest Citadel. My wife's investors will do business elsewhere. I believe the island state will welcome them with open arms." Carson could never turn down free money. He was in dire need of finances to stabilize the economy. Right after their meeting, the three bosses of the 9 states financial group began their business endeavor. The price of special herbs increased by 17 times in 2 short days. The warehouses used to store herbs were swept clean, and many civilians hiked up mountains to search for more. Stephen and Kim were offering much more than Tempest Citadel for cultivation resources, but they'd invested in many pharmaceutical companies long before their trip to Garan. The net profits of both operations combined were expected to reach $10 million. During cultivation, various medicinal pills were needed to regulate energy inside the body and treat injuries. Tempest Citadel would be forced to rely on the dwindling reserves of resources. Aside from herbs, ores, and crystals were also loaded into containers and sent to the port. Another large-scale hunt in the mountains for ores and crystals began. With more job opportunities, the pressure on Garan's officials was greatly reduced. The 3 bosses of the 9 states financial group, Zorvis, Juno, and Mike, went to Stephen and Kim's hotel room to express their gratitude. The expansion of their business wouldn't have been this successful if it weren't for them. "Do you have any plans to buy an enterprise?" Stephen asked. "Tempest Citadel's financial chain is on the brink of collapse. Now's your chance to take it for yourselves." "Thank you for your support, Mr. Adams. Frankly, we've always planned to expand our business to Garan. But after some investigation, we found that Tempest Citadel was involved in most of the businesses here. We were worried that they would put pressure on us, so our plans have been put on hold for many years." No matter how much money the 3 bosses had, they could never match up to martial artists, especially not in their own territory. "You don't have to worry about that. I'm going to visit them in a week to discuss a collaboration. If it goes well, their business will become yours." If Stephen's plan worked, Tempest Citadel would no longer have a steady flow of funds. The amount they received in exchange for selling their businesses wouldn't be enough to sustain them financially in the long run. It wouldn't be long until they went bankrupt. The 3 bosses were thrilled. The profits would be going to the U.S., but the 9 states financial group would receive a large cut. After the 3 bosses of the 9 states financial group said their goodbyes and left, Stephen waited at the hotel for news from Wes and Aston. Whether it was Gabriel, the Asoras, or the external members being controlled, if they wanted to stir up trouble, they'd have to cause a commotion in the mountains, the port, or the royal city. These 3 locations were close to the island, and Tempest Citadel's faction was at the core. Wes and Aston returned at 11 o'clock at night. The external members attacked a fishing village at the port, Aston reported. When we arrived, they were long gone. We don't know where they went. He didn't need to go into too much detail for Stephen to understand what had happened. The external members weren't as strong as the internal members, but their physical strength alone could break the bones and tendons of regular fishermen. Why did they target the village? Are they trying to control the trading routes at sea? It's hard to say, Wes said, but there are warships docked at the port. They caused a big disturbance, so someone will deal with them. The external members and the Asoras weren't the only ones on the run. Stephen's priority was to find Gabriel, but there was no trace of him. While they were discussing, they heard voices coming from the room next door. Stephen had reserved that room for Tristan, Zane, and the 5 Ascenders. The Ascenders had gone off the radar, so it was probably Tristan and Zane. His guess was confirmed when he went next door and saw the 2 of them sitting at the table, engrossed in a serious conversation. "You've been gone for a while," Stephen said, sitting across from them. "What have you been up to?" Zane's frown deepened. "We sneaked into Tempest Citadel again and found a tomb of ancient martial artists. We sensed a faint life force coming from their bodies. They're not dead, but there was no trace of their consciousness." Stephen was at a loss for words at the shocking discovery and a little confused. Zane noticed he wasn't quite following, so he explained. The further a martial artist progresses in their cultivation, the longer their lifespan will be. It's normal for them to live tens of thousands of years. Tempest Citadel stole their cultivation, but their inner energy is still there. They're extracting their energy like solar batteries and slowly letting it recover before repeating the same process. After enough time passes, they'll be able to create more artificial martial artists like Gabriel. "Is there a way to wake them up?" Stephen asked. "They can help us fight against Tempest Citadel." "In theory, it's a good idea, but we don't know how," Zane said. "They've been in a comatose state for thousands of years. There's no telling what's become of their spiritual worlds." Not only was the tomb heavily guarded, they had no way of helping the ancient martial artists regain consciousness. Tempest Citadel was a disaster waiting to happen. No matter which direction they took to develop their faction, a large-scale battle was unavoidable. They had grand ambitions, and they would stop at nothing to achieve them. The more Stephen, Tristan, and Zane discovered about Tempest Citadel, the more powerful and dangerous they seemed to be. None of them had a solution. It was already late, so they decided to discuss this again in the morning. When Stephen returned to his room, his mind was a mess. He crawled into bed, but before he could lie down, the iridescent dragon appeared enthusiastically in a flash of pink light. "This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. It's rare to come across ancient martial artists. If I take their power for myself, my cultivation will improve in minutes." "And how exactly do you plan to do that? No one knows how long Tempest Citadel has been experimenting on humans and stealing cultivation from Ascenders. They're capable of anything." The iridescent dragon didn't share Stephen's concerns. Its techniques specialized in mental energy and perception. "Stop wasting time in the hotel. Go out and investigate. I'm going to infiltrate their spiritual worlds and convince them to become our allies." Under the dragon's incessant urging, Stephen had no choice but to climb out of bed and change into his uniform. He drove an off-road vehicle to the port and sailed a boat to the island. In the darkness of the night, the necklace of beast fangs was a valuable treasure. The animals and beasts in the depths of the forest became his eyes. They gave him a view of every inch of the land. Stephen mounted the threadworms and observed the mountain through the lens of the animals. "To enter their spiritual world, I'll have to separate my spiritual energy from my body, right?"
"Yes. Are you worried?"
the threadworms asked. "Kind of. We're in enemy territory. If they find us, it's game over." Stephen had asked Wes and Aston to protect Kim while he was away. The ice dragon and the flood dragon were lounging in their hotel room, but they weren't as reliable. Beasts were strong, but their strategizing fell a bit short when compared to humans. One mistake could lead to irreversible accidents. Having backup would cover all the bases. The threadworms followed the directions Tristan and Zane had given them earlier and made their way to a valley enveloped by fog. Stephen sensed the auras of the internal members inside.
Should we go ahead and scout the area first?
The threadworms volunteered. No, they'll find you. It won't be an easy battle. We need to end it as soon as possible. Stephen asked the threadworms to condense their special type of mud. He smeared it into his hair, and his strands turned blonde. The internal members on guard duty had probably been assigned to this post for a while. They might have heard of Gabriel before, but his existence was kept on the down low, and he was trapped most of the time. He doubted the guards ever saw his real appearance, but just in case, he'd temporarily dyed his hair blonde. The color should last until the end of the fight. How do I look? Stephen asked the threadworms. You're around 80 to 90% similar to him. They won't have time to see through your disguise if the fight ends quickly. Stephen mounted the threadworms and they glided across the ground without making a sound. He condensed his inner energy on his palm and unleashed it in a wave towards the guards. They didn't see it coming. In all the years they'd guarded this cave, no one had ever trespassed. 6 of the guards were knocked off their feet. The rest of them raised their swords to the sky and activated the restraining array. A golden symbol flashed in the clouds, dispersing the darkness. They were stunned when they saw the trespasser. Their gazes were fixed on his blonde hair. Are you Gabriel? One of the guards asked cautiously. That's me, Stephen replied. Tempest Citadel's days are numbered. Take your unrealistic ambitions with you to hell. He condensed a ball of fire and threw it at the guards. The necklace of beast fangs enhanced the flames. The fire divided and took on the form of jackals, wolves, tigers, and leopards. The temperature in the valley rose sharply, and the fog evaporated in an instant. The guards dodged the beasts, but they didn't expect an attack from the ground. The threadworms had condensed balls of iron sand that dispersed and spread over the clearing. The sand beneath the guards' feet moved and formed a chain. It wrapped around their ankles. Before they could say anything, the flaming beasts rushed inside them through their mouths and burned their internal organs to ashes. The other guards cursed. You ungrateful bastard. Don't forget who created you. Tempest Citadel is your family. Those who repay kindness with sin will die a gruesome death. I don't recall ever being treated like a family member, Stephen said. You trapped me inside that cave like some wild animal. I don't owe you anything. The golden array was slowly descending. The rocky cliffs caved in and turned into deep ravines from the crushing pressure. The array was powerful, but the guards maintained a distance from Stephen. They'd heard rumors about Gabriel and his martial arts. They had no intention of risking their lives. As Stephen attacked and kept up his momentum, the guards gradually retreated to the entrance of the tomb. If they kept this up, they'd be revealing their faction's secrets to their enemy. The guards exchanged glances and nodded. They surrounded Stephen and pointed the tips of their swords in his direction. The golden array sped up. The pressure crashed down on Stephen, and he felt like he'd been thrown into a vast ocean. He slammed his fists on the ground, sweeping a blanket of sand into the air. It covered the golden light, and the valley was once again shrouded in darkness. The threadworms condensed another ball of iron sand, and it took on Gabriel's form. In the darkness, it was hard to make out the features. The guards were fooled, and they impaled the decoy with their swords. An ear-piercing sound echoed in the night. Their swords grinded against the metallic fragments in the sand. When the guards pulled back, they realized that their swords were stuck inside the body. Stephen condensed a ball of electrical energy and threw it at the decoy. The electrical current traveled down the length of the swords. Just as it reached the tips, the guards made a prompt decision to abandon their weapons and stepped back. A faint explosion sounded in the air. The iron sand had destroyed the restraining array. The iridescent dragon appeared. It opened its mouth, releasing ripples through the air. The guards couldn't dodge in time. The threadworm's sand on the ground restricted their movements. When the ripples hit them, they felt like their minds had gone blank. Stephen materialized his sword and slit their throats. In a battle between martial artists, one fatal blow was all it took to determine the outcome of a fight. Their bodies collapsed, and the clouds dispersed. Moonlight filtered into the valley. Interfering with spiritual energy is surprisingly effective. That's only natural, the iridescent dragon said matter-of-factly. Many martial artists pursue the pinnacle of physical strength when they're cultivating, but they neglect strengthening their mental energy. Techniques that affect the mind are usually effective. The rest of their journey was free of obstacles. It was a straight path to the tomb. The threadworms sensed the defensive arrays and avoided them as they glided through the valley. 5 miles later, the rocky terrain gave way to a futuristic tomb constructed with cutting-edge technology. The ascenders were kept underground, sealed in a bulletproof glass case. They were wrapped in a cocoon of translucent silk threads that extracted their inner energy. Stephen crouched to get a better look. There were small cracks spanning the glass, and a special material pieced the fragments together. He tapped the glass surface, and the color of the silk changed. The iridescent dragon flew in his face. "Wait, there's a sensory system installed underground. If you forcefully break the glass, the bodies will be destroyed." "Are their bodies that fragile? They've been alive for a long time, but they're ancient martial artists." "The silk threads are penetrating their skin. If the sensory system is triggered, the threads will inject a toxin into their bodies." Stephen stood up to search for another way to access the underground space. The iridescent dragon flew in his face and blocked his path again. "All you need to do is hide. Separate your spiritual energy from your body and leave the rest to me." "What are you going to do?" "You'll see." The threadworms dug a deep hole in the stone wall nearby. Stephen crawled inside and separated his spiritual energy into a ball of light. The iridescent dragon condensed a pink bubble and did the same. He joined the pink shimmer of light inside the bubble and moved it downwards. The bubble passed through the glass and stopped above the cocoons. "When you enter their spiritual worlds, you'll encounter bizarre phenomena," the iridescent dragon warned. "They originate from their imagination. Don't attack or react, or else the martial artist will repel you from their bodies. There's also a risk that Tempest Citadel already infiltrated and occupied their spiritual worlds." "Is there a way to ensure our safety?" Stephen asked. "Well, you can head back to the hotel, and I'll do this alone." The iridescent dragon was determined to obtain the martial artist's power with or without him. Of course, Stephen wasn't about to leave his companion alone in the middle of enemy territory. The two of them phased through the cocoon and entered the bodies. A wave of dizziness washed over them. When they opened their eyes, they were no longer in the underground space. They were in a purple bamboo forest with no end in sight. Stephen took on the appearance of his main body and touched the bamboo. The texture was the same as bamboo in real life. The iridescent dragon transformed into a petite girl with pink hair wearing a dress. She skipped around the clearing excitedly. "What's the plan?" Stephen asked. "Find the Ascenders. They're like us. They can move freely in their spiritual worlds in the human forms. My senses are telling me that their spiritual worlds have been merged into a single entity. Tempest Citadel probably thought it'd be easier to manage them this way." Stephen had signed a blood contract with the Ice Dragon, so he had access to its spiritual energy even when they were apart. He condensed a phantom of its original form and took to the skies on its back. The purple bamboo extended past the dragon and trapped it in the middle. Stephen sliced the bamboo with his sword, but new segments grew from the incisions to repair itself at a rapid rate. Even if he used up his energy, he wouldn't be able to damage the scenery. With no other choice, he landed on the ground. "Don't be so impatient," the iridescent dragon said. "We have all the time in the world to find them. A person's mind is thousands of times faster than the flow of time. Decades can pass in here, but only 3 to 5 seconds will have gone by in the real world." Stephen was less than inclined to spend decades in an ancient martial artist's mind, and he definitely wasn't going to spend millennia. "I don't know about you, but I'm not spending more than a few days in here. I don't have that much patience." He condensed the threadworm's spiritual energy and transformed it into tiny silver earthworms. They burrowed into the ground and disappeared to search for traces of the ancient martial artists. Music drifted through the forest. It was a pleasant melody composed with a flute and zither. With nothing else to guide them, Stephen and the iridescent dragon followed the sound of the music. After walking for some time, they came across a small group of middle-aged men in ancient attire. Stephen was just feeling relieved that he wouldn't have to spend decades or even millennia in here when the ancient martial artists whirled around and attacked. The Ascenders with the flute used his instrument as a weapon. It was faster than a spear. Colorful sound waves that were visible to the naked eye swept toward Stephen. The other Ascenders followed suit. The iridescent dragon peered out from behind Stephen and condensed a series of pink bubbles. The sound waves were redirected towards the forest. The Ascenders were startled by the strange beast in human form that had seemingly come out of nowhere. Tempest Citadel had control over their physical bodies, but they retained their power in their spiritual worlds. This was their independent space. It was similar to the dreams of ordinary people. They were invincible in the dreams of their own creation. This strange beast had the ability to interfere with their spiritual worlds and break the peace. The Ascenders were concerned that something would happen in the real world. As long as their physical bodies were intact, they had hope that they would one day be freed and have an opportunity to take revenge. The Ascender with the flute stopped first and signaled for the others to do the same. Why is a low-level beast like you intruding on our spiritual world? Are you a mount the faction raised? The iridescent dragon threw him a disdainful look. Why are you being so hostile? Haven't you come to terms with reality yet? The ancient era is over. Tempest Citadel imprisoned you for thousands of years. We have indeed fallen from grace. Why else would an animal be teaching us a lesson? Both sides had stopped fighting, but the tension was steadily rising. Stephen didn't come all the way here to make new enemies. He put his sword away and greeted the Ascenders respectfully. He introduced himself, explained why he was there, and informed them of what had been happening in the real world. The Ascenders had been trapped in the spiritual world for a long time. Their hatred for Tempest Citadel had only grown stronger with every year that passed. Stephen's introduction revived their anger, and their caution towards the iridescent dragon vanished. The Ascender with the flute walked up to Stephen and sized him up. This young man was beyond ordinary. He was no one special. The Ascenders had reached the true immortal realm. Any martial artists below them were like children, including Stephen, who was at the intermediate stage of the red dust immortal realm. We can help you advance to the late stages of your current realm, but you'll need to rely on your own comprehension to break through. How do we know you won't go back on your promise once you leave this place? The Ascenders were worried that their unique martial arts technique would be leaked to the world and negatively affect the faction they belonged to, but Stephen didn't have any way of guaranteeing his promises. I understand your concerns, but I'm not in my main body. How can I get you to trust me? We can sign a blood contract. You'll be our servant, and we'll be your master. The Ascender was treating Stephen like a beast, and the iridescent dragon was infuriated. It shifted into its dragon form and condensed into a bubble. It rose into the sky and expanded. Don't you understand the position you're in? Tempest Citadel stole your cultivation and trapped you underground for thousands of years to extract your inner energy. We're the only ones who can help you. The bubble burst, and an explosion shook the sky. The iridescent dragon didn't specialize in offensive abilities, but in its spiritual world centered around dreams and imagination, its unique technique to affect mental energy and perception had an overwhelming advantage. It could create an endless amount of simulations. The Ascenders felt like they'd been doused in flames. The heat and the explosion almost crushed them. Their vision blurred and their ears rang. It took a few minutes for their senses to return to normal. You're not invincible in your spiritual world, the iridescent dragon said. We're not asking you to help us for free. When we return to the real world, we'll save your main bodies from Tempest Citadel. It doesn't matter if you refuse. You only have one choice. If we can save you, we can also destroy you. The iridescent dragon's tone was harsh and threatening. A huge pressure fell on the Ascenders. If they didn't cooperate, their main bodies would be destroyed, and their spiritual energies would vanish into thin air. They gathered around and whispered before coming to a unanimous decision. I'll give you a cultivation manual. Comprehend it before returning to the real world. The Ascender with the flute waved his hand, and a golden scroll appeared in front of Stephen. The words, "Devour the Void," were written on it. Most of the beasts Stephen encountered in the Asura realm, including the threadworms and the flood dragon, had the ability to devour their enemy and digest their flesh and blood to strengthen their own bodies. Stephen unfurled the scroll and began to comprehend. The Ascenders sat beside him and chattered nonstop as they gave him pointers. As martial artists progressed in their cultivation, their beginner techniques were gradually abandoned. Stephen didn't rely on martial arts manuals, and he never forgot the techniques he learned. He began most of his fights with his sword and followed up with other techniques depending on how his opponent reacted. The more Stephen comprehended the scroll, the more hungry he became. He felt the need to devour something. The Ascender with the flute drew a line on Stephen's palm. It disappeared a moment later. Don't be afraid of the unpleasant shape. Their mouths won't show themselves unless you cast the technique. Stephen recognized this technique. Gabriel had used the same one during their fight. Tempest Citadel didn't just steal the Ascenders' cultivation and inner energy. They also stole their martial arts techniques.
Can I absorb non-living substances like energy-rich ores and crystals? Stephen asked. The Ascender with the flute nodded. If Stephen cultivated this technique to the highest level, he would be able to absorb anything that existed within the realm. Do you know why Ascenders exist? Just like how the Asura King created the Asura realm, a god or a powerful cultivator created Earth. It's known as the human realm to beings from an alternate dimension. It goes without saying that those with the power to create realms also have the ability to swallow them. It's contradictory, but creating realms is a form of generating energy. It's a slow process, but it works. Stephen was stunned by the unexpected truth of the world. The Ascender continued without giving him a chance to process the universe's mysteries. When a true immortal martial artist ascends, they break through the spatial barrier of the human realm to reach a higher plane. This is enlightenment, the ultimate goal of cultivation. It's also our instinct to avoid death. The longer one stays in a realm, the higher risk of being swallowed by its creator. The gears in Stephen's mind turned. If this was true, then Tempest Citadel was an enemy of mankind. They were killing Ascenders and justifying themselves with a baseless theory. They claimed that opening spatial rifts during ascension damaged the human realm's seal and put them at risk of invasions. But without Ascenders, humanity had no hope for reaching a higher plane. At this rate, the human realm was heading towards a future of destruction. I understand what you're trying to say. I'll do what I can to stop Tempest Citadel once I return to the real world. I'll also try to save your bodies. I wish you the best, the Ascender with the flute said with a smile. We've lived a long life. Even though it was in captivity, we don't care about things like life and death anymore. What we want is revenge against Tempest Citadel. After an unknown amount of time, Stephen comprehended the entirety of the scroll's contents with the Ascenders' help. When he and the iridescent dragon left the spiritual world, it was still nighttime. According to his watch, only 5 minutes had passed. Stephen couldn't even begin to imagine what life had been like for the Ascenders in captivity. If thousands of years had passed in real life, how long did it feel like in their spiritual world? He left the valley with the iridescent dragon. They'd caused a commotion by killing the guards, and the elders were probably on their way here. Sure enough, as soon as they left, the elder responsible for upholding the faction's rules and regulations surrounded the valley with his team. He was outraged by the blood and gore. He ordered his team to seal off the mountain and find the culprits. Dozens of internal members separated from the team and spread out. The elder and his remaining team members headed to the tomb. This was Tempest Citadel's main source of power. It'd be a disaster if anything happened to it. The elder scrutinized the tomb. The bulletproof glass case and the cocoons were intact. Nothing was out of place. He circled the tomb a few more times and relaxed when the results were the same. Their target of suspicion fell on Gabriel and the Asuras. The internal members searched until dawn broke, but they didn't find any clues. Thorin held an emergency meeting with the elders to make new arrangements. The paper couldn't contain fire. The consequences of the shipwreck were like dominoes. The economic blow affected every business Tempest Citadel was involved in. It also affected the faction itself. Without a steady flow of funds, they didn't have enough money to purchase consumables and raw materials needed for cultivation. Thorin was seething with anger when the internal members returned empty-handed, but there was nothing he could do. The culprits were long gone. He needed to focus on resolving the financial crisis. He wasn't usually involved in trivial matters like these, so he waved for the elders in charge of the faction's businesses to step up and express his opinion. The elder was so stressed that he looked like he'd aged 10 years. He braced himself and said, "Our businesses involving maritime trade, tourism, and entertainment are on the verge of going bankrupt. The economy isn't doing so well." His excuse boiled down to complaints, and his solution was to wait for the economy to improve. Thorin didn't want to take a passive approach. "If we can't count on Garan, can't we just find another business partner? We have a local advantage, and our businesses are protected by the military. All we're missing are investors." The economy was declining. Who would risk investing in their business at a time like this? As the elders scrambled to come up with a reply, the sovereign came to mind. As a ruler of the U.S., no one was richer than him. "Should we invite the sovereign over? If he's willing to lend us a hand, our problems will be resolved." The two elders who'd gone to the Asura realm to seal the spatial rift had encountered Stephen more than anyone else present. He didn't have a good impression of their faction, and he wouldn't be able to help them for free. He's not easy to manipulate. If we want an investment from the U.S., we'll have to pay an equal price. Thorin decided it was worth a try. They didn't have any other options. In the afternoon, the elder in charge of Tempest Citadel's businesses led a small team of external members to visit the Sovereign. Stephen had planned to discuss a collaboration with them in a week, but they'd saved him the trouble and come ahead of time. "I've heard a lot about you," Stephen said when the elder arrived with his team. The elder flashed a smile. "You flatter me. You're much more outstanding. To become a leader of a country at such a young age is an incredible achievement." When the pleasantries were out of the way, Stephen took the initiative to bring up a more serious topic. "I've heard about the shipwreck. I'm sorry for your losses. You're an ancient martial arts faction, so I'm sure it didn't affect your finances too much." "Unfortunately, we run many businesses," the elder replied. "Our current finances aren't enough to cover our daily expenses. We also need to pay commercial losses and compensation. We're urgently looking for external investments." The external members placed share transfer and mortgage agreements on the table. The documents involved a wide range of businesses and even a few mines on the mountain. Stephen wasn't interested in their businesses. What he wanted were the sacred manual fragments, but if he'd openly asked for it, the elder would get suspicious. He put on an act with Kim and carefully reviewed the documents. Kim wasn't satisfied with the collateral the elder provided. "Aside from the mines, the future of your business is uncertain. They could go bankrupt any time, and our investors will amount to nothing." "It's not possible for our faction's businesses to go bankrupt," the elder insisted. "A steady flow of profits is necessary to maintain our prosperity. We have ways to ensure their continued success." "In other words, you're going to monopolize the industries you're involved in," Stephen finished. The elder chuckled. "That's rather straightforward of you. We're not the first ancient faction to use this method. It's nothing new." After a round of bargaining and negotiating, the percentage of shares in the agreement was slightly adjusted. Kim signed her name. She would be investing $2 billion. While she was having a heated discussion on the breakdown of the investment, Garon's imperial advisor came to visit. The civilians at the fishing village near the port had been slaughtered in broad daylight. He didn't have the courage to trek up the mountain and denounce Tempest Citadel, so his only option was to seek justice from the elder in charge of the faction's businesses. The advisor swallowed his anger and played a video of the massacre at the fishing village. "The culprits in the video are members of your faction, and also executives of your company. What is the meaning of this?" The elder waved one of the external members over in annoyance and told him to head out and investigate. After he left, the elder gave the advisor a general explanation of his faction's recent affairs to avoid further conflict and misunderstandings. He shifted the blame to Gabriel and beings from another world. The advisor was quickly led by the elder's nose, and his attention turned elsewhere. "Your enemies couldn't have sneaked into the imperial court, right? It's the foundation of Garon. It can't be shaken." "I can't guarantee anything," the elder said. "The only advice I can give you right now is to tighten your security." The advisor was terrified. He left soon after, and silence returned to the hotel room. The elder also said his goodbyes to Stephen and Kim and left with his team. Tardador was hiding near a swamp on Garon's mountain with his team. The Asuras that went out to investigate came back to report to him. Garon's guards are searching for the artificial cultivator, but they haven't found him yet. The Sovereign's on good terms with the officials. It looks like he'll be staying in this country for some time. Tardador wasn't interested in anyone except the artificial cultivator. Gabriel was the only one who could match up to him. That night, Tardador broke into Tempest Citadel's territory again. The sapphire necklace contained a large amount of spiritual energy. It formed a barrier to hide his aura. Not even the elders of the faction could sense his presence. Tardador sneaked into a brightly lit building. When the internal members finished their training and returned to their rooms, he ambushed them and turned them into his puppets. Their expressions turned blank. They jumped off the balcony and headed to the swamp. Tardador wiped the blood from his mouth with a satisfied grin. "Blood from human cultivators tastes much better than ores and crystals. The other members under my control are already at the swamp. When the time is right, we'll attack the faction." The Asura King's voice sounded from the necklace. "It doesn't matter how many internal and external members you control. The leader and the elders are the true pillars of Tempest Citadel. You can't take them down. We need to search for the artificial cultivator, Tartador said. As long as he sees the faction as his enemy, we can try to rope him in. You're finally using your brain, the Asura King praised. The best way to deal with human cultivators is to outsmart them. Early the next morning, a luxurious motorcade came to invite Stephen and Kim to the Imperial Court. Carson was scared out of his wits when the Imperial advisor relayed the Elder's message. A murderous enemy had appeared in Garan. The royal family could be the next target. Carson set up a feast in the courtyard and arranged for a performance before heading out to welcome Stephen and Kim. None of the five-star hotels can compare to the comfortable environment of the Imperial Court. Don't you agree, Mr. Adams? Stephen knew exactly why Carson had invited him here. He couldn't help but tease the timid king. Haven't you heard? Formidable enemies enjoy extravagant performances. Your Imperial Court is lively and entertaining. Don't be surprised if they pay you a visit. Have you tightened your security yet? An awkward atmosphere filled the air. The entire world had seen how skilled the sovereign was in martial arts. Carson wanted to use him as a bodyguard. He was about to ask Stephen if it would be possible to ensure his safety when the trees rustled and a figure dashed through the branches and leaves. Stephen's eyes were sharp. He caught a glimpse of blonde hair. Kim, Wes, and Aston are going to take you back to the hotel. Don't leave your room. Kim was worried, but there was no time to ask him what was going on. Wes and Aston escorted her out of the Imperial Court. Carson's hands began to tremble. He almost dropped his wine glass. His eyes darted left and right, searching for the intruder. Stephen looked straight at Gabriel, who was hiding among the trees. You've been hiding for a while. Aren't you hungry? Why don't you join us for lunch? Gabriel was confident in his martial arts. No one in the Imperial Court posed a threat to him. He leaped from the treetops and landed in the empty seat next to Stephen. Carson jumped out of his skin. Before he could scream, Stephen patted his shoulder and calmed him down with a wave of gentle mental energy. The guards in the distance noticed that something wasn't right. A blond, middle-aged man had appeared out of thin air. Carson noticed the guards walking towards the table and dismissed them with a wave of his hand. Gabriel shoveled food into his mouth, as if he hadn't eaten for days. He had no table manners. He held a drumstick in one hand and a wine bottle in the other. It was hard to imagine that this wild and unruly man was the strongest martial artist from Tempest Citadel. Keeping yourself hidden for days couldn't have been easy, Stephen said. Are you planning to return to Tempest Citadel? They trapped me on the mountain for years. Why would I go back? I can go wherever I want and do whatever I want. A life of freedom is the best. Gabriel pointed at the feast from the table and stared at Carson. For example, if I want to have a meal at the Imperial Court, who can stop me? Carson averted his gaze. He'd heard from the advisor that Gabriel had lost control of himself while he was out training and slaughtered 15 towns and villages in Garan. He was dangerous. Stephen was talking to him with a smile, but no one knew how the situation would develop. The wine bottles on the table were emptied, one after another. Gabriel's stomach was like a bottomless pit. The dishes were wiped clean. The chefs came over to serve new dishes from time to time, but they had no intentions of stopping. The iridescent dragon's voice echoed in Stephen's mind. Aren't you going to fight him? You'll learn the Ascender's technique. If you absorb his energy, you can break through to the late stages of the Red Dust Immortal Realm, or maybe even higher. Stephen had other plans. Gabriel was strong enough to go up against the leader and the elders of Tempest Citadel. Stephen needed to get him on his side. He trains unique techniques from ancient martial artists. I don't know if I can beat him. The iridescent dragon snorted. You're being too cautious. Carson gathered his courage to speak to Gabriel. If you're interested in the Imperial Court, feel free to stay here for as long as you'd like. We'll provide accommodations for you. Gabriel set down his fork. Staying in one place attracts uninvited guests. I don't have time to deal with them. Plates and utensils were piled in front of Gabriel like a mountain. He looked Stephen in the eye. What are you thinking about? Stealing my inner energy to take down Tempest Citadel? You're smarter than you look, but I don't need another enemy. Tempest Citadel had something I want, and I plan to get my hands on it. With your current strength, the elders will kill you in minutes. If you're full, why don't we spar for a bit? Stephen asked. You have the cultivation of multiple ascenders inside you. I'd like to test how strong you really are. Gabriel had been lingering near the mountain, which meant that there was something he had to do in Tempest Citadel's territory. Stephen didn't know what it was, but Gabriel wouldn't be open to a discussion unless they were on equal footing. The two of them jumped out of their seats and ran back to the Imperial Court, leaving the stunned Carson alone in the courtyard. At the back of the Imperial Court was a garden of exotic plants and flowers. The scenery was breathtaking. Outsiders were forbidden from getting close, so it was a suitable location for a spar. Stephen had just rounded the corner when Gabriel lunged at him. A slit cut across his palms, and a row of sharp teeth peeked out from within. The iridescent dragon appeared behind Stephen. "I think your chances of winning are higher. Your foundation is more stable." Stephen didn't have a chance to respond. Gabriel's palm slammed against his upper arm and chest. The teeth tore through his clothes and dug into his skin. Gabriel stepped back in confusion. "Your defenses are higher than I thought. Ordinary martial artists would have been torn to shreds." "On the other hand, your techniques aren't that mysterious," Stephen said. "Being conceited won't save you." Gabriel spread his hands and condensed vortexes on his palms. The spiritual energy in the air flowed inside him. The garden was forbidden for a reason. The concentration of spiritual energy was several times higher than the other attractions around the Imperial Court. Stephen borrowed the threadworms' spiritual energy and condensed a storm of iron sand. They took on the shape of wild beasts. The necklace of fang beasts enhanced their power, making them stronger than their counterparts in real life. The beasts surrounded Gabriel. They dodged his strikes and attacked from his blind spots, causing him to run in circles. He gritted his teeth in annoyance and charged in one direction. The beasts scattered into the sand and reformed behind him. While Gabriel was entangled with the beasts, Stephen dashed up to him and attacked with his sword. The back of his shirt was torn, and pieces of fabric were blown away, but there were only scratches left behind on his skin. Gabriel was intrigued. "I've been with Tempest Citadel for too many years to count. I'm not familiar with the martial arts techniques of outsiders." It hadn't been long since their spar began, but Stephen had already analyzed Gabriel's strengths and weaknesses. His body was filled with energy from the Ascenders' cultivations. It was as deep as the ocean. Typical attacks that came in contact with him would sink into the ocean of energy and vanish into the depths. However, Gabriel had been trapped on the mountain for a long time. He had virtually no impression of the outside world. His body was strong, but his state of mind was fragile. Stephen infused his inner energy into the Book of Destiny. His eyes glowed, and the future unveiled before him. The rest of the spar was one-sided. Gabriel's strikes were missed every time. Stephen saw through the openings in the air currents from his moves and avoided them at the last minute. They appeared to be entangled in an intense fight, but Stephen was always one step ahead. "If you can predict his movements, why are you dragging this out?" the iridescent dragon asked impatiently. "Predicting and dodging with 100% accuracy are two different things. If he uses a technique that covers a wide range, I won't be able to avoid it even if I can see it coming." Under the effects of the Book of Destiny, Stephen could see every contraction of Gabriel's muscles and the circulation of his inner energy. He could even see a shadowy clone of Gabriel's position 1 second in the future. Fights between martial artists progressed quickly. Thousands of moves were exchanged in a few minutes. 1 second was a long time. "Do you want to destroy the garden? If not, then wrap it up," the iridescent dragon urged. Okay, I was just getting used to the Book of Destiny. Predicting the future is a mystical ability." Stephen gathered the spiritual energies from the Killen and the ice dragon at his fingertips. When Gabriel rushed over again, Stephen maneuvered between his strikes and slammed his palm against his chest. Fire and ice invaded Gabriel's body and collided with his inner energy, triggering a series of explosions. They crushed his meridians. Gabriel grimaced as blood stained his clothes. Stephen deactivated the Book of Destiny, and his eyes returned to normal. The iridescent dragon landed on his shoulder. "Do you understand the gap between us? If we keep fighting like this, one of us will end up dead, and it won't be me." Gabriel chose to surrender. Continuing the match would be pointless. Stephen had an overwhelming advantage. Gabriel sat down and entered a meditative state to recover from his internal injuries. He had never experienced a spar this exhilarating. He acknowledged Stephen's martial arts. Gabriel threw out an olive branch, and his attitude became much more frank. "Us two will be enough to infiltrate Tempest Citadel. There's only one thing I want. It's a reversal type of array." Stephen had never heard of a reversal array. "What does it do?" Tempest Citadel is an ancient faction that specializes in arrays using sword formations. They have an array that can seal spatial rifts, and they have another one that does the opposite. The reversal array condenses the large amount of energy that senses the weaker areas of the human realm's spatial barrier. It can open a spatial rift for a short duration. As Stephen listened to Gabriel's explanation, he compared the reversal array with a blade forged from the bones of beasts. The array was slightly weaker and less practical. Why do you want to leave the human realm? Gabriel grinned. Don't think I'm not aware of the mysteries of the universe. Every realm is created by a cultivator, and they exist solely for progressing their cultivation. The realm is originally barren and devoid of life, but as it prospers and thrives, the amount of energy will gradually increase over time. When the energy accumulates to a certain extent, the creator will devour the realm to improve their cultivation. Gabriel's intentions and reasonings were in line with the Ascenders trapped in cocoons. No one knew how long the human realm would exist. It could end today, tomorrow, or several millennia from now. Ascending to another realm was the only way to guarantee survival. Stephen told Gabriel about the sacred manual fragment he was looking for. His goal was somewhat insignificant when compared to a ticket out of this realm. Gabriel didn't plan on taking action immediately. Tempest Citadel was an ancient martial arts faction, and they had many secrets. He was an artificial martial artist they created, but most of his time had been spent locked up in the forbidden area. He wasn't that familiar with the mountain range. Stephen reserved a VIP suite in the hotel he was staying at for Gabriel to make it more convenient for them to contact each other. The next morning, Tempest Citadel was in chaos. More than 100 members had disappeared. The elders led a team to search the entire mountain range, while Thorin sat in the main hall with a solemn expression on his face. His students stood beside him and gave him hourly updates. Tardador had led the internal and external members he'd bitten to the swamp and dove into the murky waters. As puppets, they were no longer considered human. They were like frogs and snakes in hibernation. They could hide in the swamp for an extended period of time and wait for an opportunity to drive Tempest Citadel into a corner. The higher-ups of the factions would be left with no choice but to submit to them. Thorin waited for hours, but there were no leads. He instructed his people to construct a platform to carry out another divination. The more you divine the future, the less accurate it'll be, his student advised. You've used this technique more than once recently. We don't have another option. The culprit is slowly picking us off one by one. They've infiltrated the mountain and could be hiding nearby. There are no clues or bodies. If they've left the mountain, the only place they could have gone is the royal city. Speak with the officials and check the surveillance cameras. As Thorin's students left the main hall to trek down the mountain and head to the city, the platform lit up. During the previous divination, the flames had reflected the future. This time, the fire was shrouded in darkness. Thorin had an ominous feeling that a calamity was about to descend on his faction very soon. Letting Gabriel escape was their biggest mistake. There was no one around to defend the faction. The elders searched the mountain with their team from morning to night. When they returned to the main hall with dejected looks on their faces, Thorin knew that no leads had turned up. Starting tonight, the elders and every other member will reorganize their residences and strengthen their security. Don't let your guard down. Make sure the defensive arrays are activated and fully functioning. I'll summon our faction's Divine Guardian and use its keen senses to detect the culprit's location. The elders, internal members, and external members were astonished that Thorin was resorting to some extreme measures. More than 100 members had disappeared, but nothing had happened for the past 24 hours. They had their doubts, but no one dared to openly voice their objections. Their gazes fell on the treasured sword in Thorin's hand. He used the sword like a brush and drew an image of their faction's divine guardian in the air. A massive golden salamander descended from the sky. It didn't recognize the elders or the other members, but it had some impression of Thorin. It had been a long time since we last met. You're the leader of this faction, but summoning me proves that you're no different from the other members. Your qualifications are mediocre at best. Thorin accepted the criticism with a respectful greeting. The Divine Guardian held a high status in the faction, and their lifespan was very long. It had witnessed the succession of many leaders before him. Our faction is in crisis. More than 100 of our members have gone missing, and we don't know when the culprit will strike next. The salamander jumped into the sky and observed the mountain terrain below. There was nothing unusual, but he sensed danger lurking around the corner. A beast's senses were sharper than humans. The salamander confirmed Thorin's words and declared that it would personally deal with the culprit. While Tempest Citadel was busy with their internal affairs, Kim had taken over most of their business. Stephen was watching her work when he heard a dull explosion coming from the mountain in the distance. Had Tristan, Zane, and the 5 Ascenders reached the end of their patience and started a fight in broad daylight? He hoped that wasn't the case.
The ice dragon flew Stephen to an island to search for their location. The salamander had found Tristan, Zane, and the Ascenders in the depths of the mountain and began its hunt. Zane condensed spheres of lightning and tossed them in the salamander's direction. Its tongue shot out at blinding speed and dispersed the spheres with one sweep. The explosions from the lightning that came afterward barely had an effect. They didn't leave a single scratch on the salamander's tongue. The Ascenders surrounded the salamander and threw out a cascade of energy waves. The salamander released a dark green poisonous mist that spread through the mountain. The waves of energy dissipated, forcing the Ascenders to form a barrier using their inner energy. It wasn't enough to ward off the mist completely. They deactivated their barrier and leapt out of range. The 5 of them had extraordinary teamwork. They condensed an even stronger formation of energy waves, but the mist was dense and it was spreading too fast for their technique to leave a dent. Mina and Faye increased their output, but they quickly gave up. Their spiritual energy inside the salamander was far greater than the 5 of them combined. Vlad's gaze shifted to Garon's guards at the foot of the mountain. What if we use modern weapons? You think too highly of Garon's guards, Emil said. We might have a chance if they were from the US, but Garon is nowhere near their level. The salamander heard them strategizing, but it didn't care. Humans couldn't be considered a real opponent against a divine guardian beast. The salamander released a series of bubbles towards the Ascenders. They darted in the air to dodge, but the bubbles followed closely behind. It's useless, the salamander said. The bubbles have a tracking feature. Your bodies are contaminated with the mist. There's nowhere to run. When Faye struck one of the bubbles with her sword, the film enveloped her and trapped her inside. No matter how hard she tried to destroy the bubble from the inside out, the film was indestructible. Before the other Ascenders could save her, the salamander's tongue wrapped around the bubble and swallowed it. Faye's life force vanished instantly. The Ascenders were stunned. She'd been their companion for thousands of years. Witnessing her death in the human realm was simply unimaginable. Emil was outraged. He turned around and headed straight for the salamander. I'm gonna burn that beast into a crisp and scatter its ashes. Mina, Skylar, and Vlad pulled him back. Don't be impulsive. You'll die if you get trapped in the bubbles. Tristan and Zane hid among the trees. Watching one of the Ascenders fall in battle was a shocking sight. As the 4 remaining Ascenders ran towards the foot of the mountain, the bubbles trailed after them. Tristan condensed the shadow to merge with the bubbles and lock them in place. The salamander glanced in Tristan's direction. Your technique creates independent, 2-dimensional spaces which you can enter and exit at will. I've never seen anything like it, but it's nothing more than a pretty trick. Before the salamander could cast another technique, the shadow vanished, and Tristan and Zane followed the Ascenders down the mountain. As the guardian of Tempest Citadel, the salamander was tied to specific areas. It couldn't leave the mountain or the island. When the dust settled, it returned to the faction to fulfill its duty. Stephen arrived right before the fight came to an end. The salamander was so strong that even the ice dragon was terrified. That was Tempest Citadel's guardian beast. That's similar to your role when you were with the Tribulation sect, right? Yes, but it's not the same, the ice dragon replied. Tempest Citadel provides the salamander with offerings from ancient martial artists and their factions. I've always relied on myself to progress in my cultivation. The 4 Ascenders were devastated by Faye's death. Stephen didn't bother them. He let them grieve and spoke to Tristan and Zane instead. Why do you 2 always go overboard when Tempest Citadel's involved? You're gonna get yourselves killed. It can't be helped, Zane said. They're not like the other ancient factions. They conduct human experimentations and even raised a beast using the Ascenders they kept captive. Does that mean you're considering giving up on your revenge? Of course not. I've come too far to turn back now. Stephen felt like they were going about this the wrong way. You can't go head-to-head with Tempest Citadel. First, we should figure out how to save the Ascenders in the tomb. We need their help. But I just found the location of their treasury, Tristan complained. Stephen ignored his grumbling. Tristan was obviously only here for the treasures. The sacred manual fragment was probably stored in the treasury, but Stephen had more important things to attend to before he was looking for it. The guards from Garon stationed at the foot of the mountain were trembling in fear from the earlier battle. They were far too away to watch the fight, and the sound of intense conflict told them everything they needed to know. They couldn't take sides. If they offended the Sovereign, Garon would lose their economic support. If they offended Tempest Citadel, they'd be in for an all-out war with an ancient faction. The guards were caught in the middle. Fortunately, Stephen didn't ask them to join the conflict. Mr. Adams, why don't we call for a ceasefire? The captain asked carefully. Tempest Citadel's always kept to themselves. If we don't provoke them, they'll stay out of our way. Stephen's expression darkened. He wasn't a fool. Stepping back would give Tempest Citadel the freedom to scheme in the dark. Seal off the routes leading to the island. No one is allowed to head up the mountain except for members of Tempest Citadel. If you can't stop them, so let them be. This was a difficult order to carry out for the captain. As the saying goes, the mountain relies on the rivers, while the rivers subsequently rely on the mountain. Many civilians depended on the outskirts of the mountain to make a living through hunting, chopping wood, or mining. It's an important place to the locals. If we cut off their source of income, it'll be difficult to arrange new jobs for them. That was all the more reason for Stephen to stand by his decision. No one knew wherein a large-scale conflict would break out on the mountain. Prohibiting the civilians from setting foot on the island would keep them out of danger and limit Tempest Citadel's businesses. Instructions from the sovereign were like an order from the king himself. The guards used the excuse of ferocious beasts to restrict entry to the island and the mountain. The elders of Tempest Citadel nervously waited for the divine guardian beast to return. They were relieved when it came back in one piece. How did it go? They're cunning, the salamander said. They escaped the outskirts of the mountain, but I did swallow one of them. Humans are surprisingly delicious. Next time, please keep one of them alive. We lack intel on the enemy. The culprits had been chased off the mountain, but the next storm was already here. The elder in charge of the faction's businesses was in trouble again. News of Garon's imposing martial law on the mountain had spread to the faction. The guards said that the beasts on the mountain posed a risk to the civilians, the elder's subordinate reported. They designed the entire mountain as a restricted area. They also asked us to help them capture the beasts as soon as possible. The elder couldn't possibly explain the existence of a divine guardian beast to the ignorant royal family and the city guards. This was confidential information to any ancient martial arts faction. Have a talk with the king. How dare he get in our way? I brought a small team to the imperial court, but the king turned us away. The advisor said Gabriel trespassed and barged into the imperial court a few days ago, and the king was frightened. The elder's subordinates pulled out a handful of photos from his pocket. Gabriel had been captured on camera smiling at a dining table at the imperial court, eating without a care in the world. The elder let out a long sigh. Arrange for alternative methods of transport resources up the mountain. The shipments can't be delayed. When night fell, Tardador and his puppets emerged from the swamp and prepared to take action again. They'd encountered many fearsome beasts in the Asura realm. One massive salamander wasn't enough to scare them off. Tardador didn't think too highly of human cultivators. If it weren't for Tempest Citadel's value in helping them take over the human realm, he would have killed them off a long time ago. Tardador, his team of Asuras, and his puppets made their way through the dense forest and stopped when they reached the brightly lit buildings. The salamander was lying in the garden next to the main hall. It was as still as a statue. The salamander opened its eyes when it sensed intruders. There were so many enemies lying in ambush on the mountain. He couldn't help but wonder how Thorin was handling things around here. The salamander concentrated its energy on its legs, and with 2 jumps, it reached the forest where the intruders were hiding. It released a series of bubbles right before it landed. The Asuras and the puppets were as fast as lightning. They somersaulted in the air and retreated into the bushes. The sapphire necklace formed a barrier that erased their auras. The bubbles lost track of their targets and burst when they hit the ground, melting the soil and rocks. One of the Asuras was a split second slower than the others. There was a cluster of holes on his skin from where the bubbles burst into droplets. He didn't have time to inspect his wounds. The salamander's tongue swept across the forest cleaning. Its mucus melted the surrounding vegetation, leaving no place for the Asuras and the puppets to hide. They had no choice but to fight above ground. Tardador evaded the salamander's high-frequency attacks and landed on its back. He slammed his fist into its body. The salamander's flexible skin absorbed the impact and secreted a layer of oil. Its body glistened in the moonlight. Its skin was too slippery for Tardador to gain a foothold. A bubble rose next to him. The Asura King's voice echoed from the necklace. Don't touch the bubbles. They'll trap you inside. I'll be careful. Tardador unsheathed his sword and released streaks of light with him at the center. Stephen and Gabriel were watching the fight from a cliff in the distance. From afar, Tardador in the blinding light resembled a porcupine with its hair standing on end. Gabriel gestured to Stephen's sword. The salamander's skin is too thick for your sword to penetrate. You need a better weapon. Stephen had been through many battles with this sword, and he'd only upgraded it once using the Killen's core. The speed at which his cultivation progressed was much faster than his weapon. Maybe it would end up broken in battle one of these days. Let the Asuras deal with the salamander. The elders and the other members will be there soon. While they're distracted, we should handle our priorities first.
Gabriel fell silent. He'd been searching for days, but he still hadn't found the whereabouts of the reversal array. In that case, come with me to the tomb, Stephen suggested. They're true immortal martial artists with the potential to ascend. They've been around for thousands of years and experienced many things. Maybe they'll know where the array is. Gabriel agreed and mounted the ice dragon with Stephen. It spread its wings and flew into the sky. As Stephen had predicted, the elders and the other members came running not long after the Asuras engaged in battle with the salamander. They almost dealt with Tartador, a finishing blow, but the Asura king released a wave of mental energy. A white light seared into their minds, stunning them temporarily. Tartador impaled 2 of the members with his sword, shattering their ribs and piercing their hearts. He licked the blood off his blade with a smirk as their bodies dropped to the ground. The elders and the other members stopped in their tracks. They had many techniques from ancient times, but guarding against mental energy wasn't one of them. Everyone's attention, including the salamander, was on the Asuras. Stephen patted the ice dragon's back, signaling for it to take out its storage of ammunition. The 9 states financial group had sent a batch of weapons and ammunition to be used in emergencies. The ice dragon enveloped a bomb in blue light and hurled it toward the brightly lit buildings. According to data from multiple rounds of tests, everything within a 30-mile radius would be vaporized by the explosion, and the shockwave would sweep a 60-mile radius. Tempest Citadel had set up defense arrays through the mountain. Stephen had no idea what they were, but he hoped they wouldn't diminish the bomb's effects by too much. Explosions were set off one after another along the mountain path. Smoke shrouded the forest and obstructed Stephen's vision. A deafening sound echoed in the night. Countless life forces flickered out of existence from the shockwaves. It was hard to tell if they belonged to Tempest Citadel or the Asuras. The smoke drifted to the valley with the wind. The ice dragon used it as cover and landed without anyone noticing. The internal members on patrol were no match for Gabriel. When they brandished their swords and rushed over, his arm twisted into an unnatural angle and grabbed their necks. The slits on his palms absorbed their energy at a rapid rate. When he let go, their lifeless and shriveled bodies collapsed in a heap. Absorbing energy is much better than a delicious meal. You really don't care about Tempest Citadel, Stephen said. They called you their family. Gabriel scoffed. What family? They've never treated me as one of them. It's only a matter of time before they lose the war. Gabriel lacked knowledge of the outside world, but he had an eye for potential. Stephen was skilled. Staying by his side would be beneficial to achieving his goals. The ice dragon flapped its wings, and the wind blew the layer of dirt from the explosion away from the glass containers. Stephen summoned the threadworms. Try to dig through the glass. There's a defensive array set up inside. I'll deal with that myself. Digging tunnels was the threadworms' specialty. They burrowed into the ground. The iridescent dragon wasn't idle either. It entered the Ascenders' spiritual world and told them to prepare to return to reality. The glass cracked, indicating that the threadworms had successfully accompanied their task. The silk cocoons had sensed the intruders and tightened around the Ascenders. The threads of silk penetrated deeper into their skin. Stephen condensed the kiln's flames in his palm and set the glass container on fire. The flames crept into the underground space and spread to the cocoons. The silk burned quickly and disappeared with the fire. The Ascenders' real appearance came into view. Their consciousness returned at the same time. They opened their eyes to the real world for the first time in what felt like an eternity. Energy surged within them. Stephen and Gabriel took a step back. The Ascenders were like volcanoes on the verge of erupting. They were true immortal martial artists who'd regained their power after thousands of years. The Ascender with the flute in the spiritual world went up to Stephen with a smile after familiarizing himself with his body's condition. Thank you for freeing us. My name is Warren, and those 3 are Shin, Mac, and Rory. Stephen was in a daze from experiencing the insurmountable energy of a true immortal martial artist for the first time. He didn't know what to say, so he settled for a nod as a greeting. The 4 Ascenders had heard about recent events from the iridescent dragon. Who's Tempest Citadel fighting? Warren asked. Is there really someone who's strong enough to go against them? Invaders from the Asura realm, Stephen said, finding his voice. I don't know why they're targeting Tempest Citadel, but my guess is that they want to gain control over the mountain and its resources. So that's how it is. The mountain is overflowing with spiritual energy. It's no surprise they set their sights on this place. The Ascenders noticed Gabriel's presence and looked at him intently. They'd heard about an artificial martial artist, but they'd never seen him in person. The aura he emitted was familiar and impossible not to recognize. You must be the artificial martial artist Tempest Citadel created, Warren said.
You have our cultivation inside you, but no matter how powerful you've become, you'll always be an imitation." Gabriel frowned. He didn't choose to become a replica of a true immortal martial artist. If they wanted to blame someone, then they should blame Tempest Citadel. "Whether I'm an imitation or the real thing, only the strong are respected in the world of martial arts. Your cultivations aren't the only ones I've absorbed. I've had many others inside me. If you're interested in how strong I've become, then test me." Stephen immediately stepped between Gabriel and the Ascenders. The situation was chaotic enough. They didn't need another conflict on their hands. He faced the Ascenders with a friendly smile. "We have a common enemy, and they're locked in battle right now. This is a golden opportunity. You're true immortal martial artists, the strongest cultivators in the human realm. Seize the chance and settle your grudges tonight." The Ascenders nodded in agreement. The explosions had died down and the mountain had been set ablaze, but they could feel the auras of the survivors. "We'll make sure to repay you after we settle our grudge," Rory said. "There's no need for that. It wasn't a big deal. We're actually searching for a martial arts manual for the reversal array. Do you know where it could be?" "There's a cave 20 miles southwest. Tempest Citadel stores their manuals there." Stephen thanked them, and the Ascenders left to join the battle. The ice dragon took to the skies and headed southwest. Stephen was somewhat vexed when he spotted the cave. It had been caught in the explosion. If he'd known the manual was there, he would have held off on dropping the bomb. He hoped there was a defensive array set up around the manuals that hadn't disappeared in the flames of war. Tempest Citadel stored the weapons and manuals of every leader and elder in the faction in the cave when they passed away. The weapons carried a fraction of the owner's spiritual will. They were the last line of defense if the faction was ever in danger. The aura from thousands of weapons had condensed into a massive tornado to deflect the shockwaves from the bomb's explosion. "Remnants of the spiritual will shouldn't be taken lightly," Stephen said. "If the owners of these weapons were still alive, no one would be able to shake Tempest Citadel's foundation." Gabriel didn't think too much. He dismounted and prepared to charge the tornado to force his way into the cave. "If you don't want to be torn to shreds, then wait," Stephen called after him. "Those weapons aren't like the ones you're used to. Your body isn't invincible." Gabriel stopped and looked back at him. "Then what are we going to do? Stand here and wait for the tornado to die down?" "This is a piece of cake for the threadworms." Stephen summoned the threadworms, and they condensed a storm of iron sand. The iron was magnetic and attracted to other metals. When the sand was swept into the tornado, the weapons sensed that something was amiss. They changed direction to attack the intruder, but the iron in the sand pulled them together into a mass of metal. Stephen headed for the cave, waving for Gabriel to follow him. "It's done! Let's go inside and find what we're looking for." The enormous cave was filled with dazzling weapons, manuals, and cultivation materials. Gabriel brushed past Stephen to search for the reversal array. Stephen was about to take a look around when a wisp of white ghost fire flickered to life beside him. "I've never seen you before. If you've made it this far, that means the faction is in big trouble." "What are you?" "I'm the soul of an ancient sword." Stephen was confused. Only humans and other living beings contained a soul. A weapon could gain its owner's consciousness, but how could they have their own? The iridescent dragon appeared in a flash of pink light. It was particularly interested in the white flame. "Can swords give birth to souls?" Stephen asked. "It's possible. The more the owner uses them to kill, the stronger they'll become. Blood contains the essence of the cultivator. It's not strange for a sword to have developed a consciousness." The ghost fire circled the air, seemingly in agreement with the iridescent dragon's explanation. The sword it originated from belonged to a deceased member of Tempest Citadel, but it took on a neutral stance in the current war. The ghost fire hovered in front of Stephen. "You're not that bad of a martial artist. Want to spar?" Stephen sidestepped the ghost fire to head deeper into the cave. "What's the point?" he called over his shoulder. The ghost fire was mysterious, and he didn't know what it was capable of. He had more important things to do, like sorting through the items in the cave. On the other hand, the iridescent dragon thought this was an excellent opportunity. It shifted into a young human girl and used its energy to pull Stephen's sword out of his hand from across the cave. "You want to spar with me?" the ghost fire asked in surprise. "I'm a dragon. I never pass up a challenge." The iridescent dragon swung the sword in practiced movements and released blades of light. The weapons on the shelves trembled and floated toward the ghost fire. They deflected the light and attacked the dragon from tricky angles. Their aura filled the cave. This is a narrow space, the ghost fire said. There's nowhere for you to dodge, and you only have one weapon. The iridescent dragon was calm and collected, despite the glaring disadvantage. You're separated from your sword. You think you can defeat me as a wisp of fire? The iridescent dragon infused its spiritual energy into Stephen's sword and slashed its ghost fire's direction. The white flame flickered like a candle in a storm. The ghost fire was a soul with intelligence and spiritual energy. Dealing with these kinds of entities was the iridescent dragon's specialty. Over 100 rounds passed in less than 5 minutes, and the ghost fire was gradually forced back. Is it already over? The iridescent dragon asked in disappointment. I thought you'd put up more of a fight. The ghost fire wasn't thrilled at being looked down on by a beast. The winner hasn't been decided yet. I have knowledge of every sword technique under the heavens. I can kill all of you if I use them. The iridescent dragon grinned. Let's not go too far. A pink bubble condensed behind the ghost fire and trapped it inside, cutting off its connection with the outside world. The weapons hovering in the air clattered to the ground. Stephen didn't see the point in capturing a soul. Why did you catch it? The iridescent dragon put its hands on its hips. This soul is an expert blacksmith. It'll be useful for enhancing your weapon. And with its mastery of the sword arts, it can counter any sword strike from an enemy without blinking an eye. It's a hassle to explain everything, but long story short, this soul has many benefits. Ordinary cultivators wouldn't have been able to trap the ghost fire without risking their life. This wasn't a problem for the iridescent dragon. It was talented in the mental energy department. The cave was in shambles, but Gabriel had paid no attention to the spar behind him and diligently searched for the reversal array. When he found the manual, he turned around and held it up like a prized treasure. I finally found it. I can't improve my cultivation like regular martial artists, but at least I can travel to another realm using this manual. Aren't you going to read it? Stephen asked. That's too much work. I was created with a comprehension ability. All I need to do is infuse my energy and flow into my mind. The cave became increasingly noisy as sounds of fighting drifted inside. Stephen didn't plan on getting involved. The bomb had dealt a heavy blow to Tempest Citadel. They wouldn't be able to hold on for much longer. He turned to the iridescent dragon. Didn't you say that soul can enhance my weapon? Let's do it now. The threadworms have a storage of energy-rich ores. As much as you need. The iridescent dragon nodded and condensed a phantom of a furnace. Stephen tossed his sword into the raging flames. The weapon scattered on the ground and rusted and turned to dust. The energy they contained flew into the furnace. The ghost fire's voice echoed in the cave. The Killen's core won't get you far. Throw in your necklace and refine it together with your sword. Stephen reached for the necklace of beast fangs he'd gotten from Killian. This? It's a rare item. There's nothing to worry about. Your sword will retain some of the necklace's effects after they merge. As the youngest and most inexperienced person here, Stephen's opinion held no value. He did as the ghost fire suggested and tossed the necklace into the furnace. The fire burned from night to dawn before it went out. Stephen examined his new sword with interest. Its appearance was mostly the same, except for the hollow circle of fangs on its hilt. Its aura had grown more violent and destructive. My forging skills are one of the best, the ghost fire said proudly. Your sword looks similar to what it was before, but don't doubt its power. Thank you for your help. Stephen ruffled the iridescent dragon's hair. If you need anything in the future, let my dragon know. It's my partner in crime. The iridescent dragon snorted. You're my underling, not the other way around. The sounds of fighting had disappeared from outside the cave. Stephen and Gabriel mounted the ice dragon, and it flew over the battlefield. The terrain had been altered beyond recognition, but there were no signs of blood or bodies. Each party had turned the other into ashes when they killed them. There were no Asuras in sight. Tartador didn't risk his or his companions' lives. He remotely controlled his puppets and had them charge into the battlefield and kill indiscriminately. I went without saying that the puppets were annihilated. Emil, Mina, Skylar, and Vlad's spiritual energies had been extinguished. Without their main bodies, they couldn't withstand Thorin's final technique. The four of them, including Faye, were ascenders who'd reached a higher plane. If their main bodies were still alive in another realm, losing a fraction of their spiritual energy wouldn't kill them. The same concept applied to the four guardian beasts of Phantasma Isle. Their spiritual energies had vanished, but their main bodies existed in another realm. Tristan and Zane had retreated towards the end of the battle when they reached their limits. They were drenched in blood and hiding behind a boulder. The last group remaining on the battlefield were the four ascenders whom Stephen had freed from their cocoons. Rory wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth with a bright smile. Where are the rest of the elders?
Did they abandon their leader? Thorin has no one left around him. Even if he dies, he'll be too ashamed to face his ancestors in the afterlife. Thorin was standing on top of the salamander's head. Both of them were at the end of their ropes. If it weren't for their willpower, they would have perished in the battle. Aside from a few elders who weren't on the mountain, the core elders were dead. More than half of the internal and external members had perished with them. If Thorin hadn't made the split-second decision to unleash his ultimate technique, all of the internal and external members would have been killed. When the sun rose, Tempest Citadel would have become a faction of the past and written into history books. "Can you keep going?" Thorin whispered. "They've reached their limits. We might be able to win after one last battle." The salamander reached out with its aura and detected another group on the mountain. "No, there are other enemies lurking in the dark. Our priority should be revitalizing the faction. Don't waste your time on these people." Even if they wanted to keep fighting, they couldn't because their faction was on the verge of being annihilated. Tempest Citadel's resources and treasured lands no longer existed. Thorin clenched his teeth and nodded. The salamander jumped into the sky and fled into the distance. The Ascenders let them go. Their goal wasn't to kill Thorin. The leader of Tempest Citadel who'd stolen their cultivation and trapped them on the mountain wasn't around anymore. Ruining the faction to this extent was enough for them. It'd be difficult for Thorin to reestablish his faction and expand its influence to its peak state. Warren watched Stephen dismount the ice dragon. "It's been thousands of years since I've had a real fight. There weren't that many people worthy of being my opponent. Are you interested in sparring with me?" "I have a better idea. Let's head to the royal city and have Garon's government take care of this mess." Sparring with ancient martial artists would help Stephen improve his own martial arts, but he didn't have the energy for that right now. He brought everyone to the city and checked them into the luxury hotel near the Imperial Court. The fire on the mountain burned for several days before it was extinguished. The bomb had completely altered the terrain and destroyed many mines. The disaster almost drove Carson crazy. He was slumped on his throne, listening to a report from his ministers with a blank expression. Tempest Citadel is ruined. Their members have disappeared, and their businesses in Garon are about to fall apart. What else is there? The ministers looked at each other, not knowing what to say. Things had just calmed down from the shipwreck, but now another disaster had happened in the mountains. The minister in charge of business stepped forward. "The economy is improving. When the 9 States Financial Group came to the port, they replaced Tempest Citadel's businesses. Shipping, mining, and light industry manufacturing are under rapid development, and experts in their respective fields have arrived in our country to oversee their projects. The company has also invested in many startups with potential. The total tax revenue is about to return to normal." That was when Carson remembered the 9 States Financial Group. He didn't think they were that reliable when Stephen introduced them, but now they were his last resort. "Invite their boss to the Imperial Court. I'd like to discuss a collaboration. They're more reliable than martial artists who only know how to fight and kill." Carson's expression brightened faster than the time it took to turn a page of a book. With a few words from the minister in charge of business, his despair had turned to hope.